A changing climate and often misguided human attempts to tame nature is making water more scarce and more precious. Restricting access to water is becoming a prominent tactic in conflicts. We looked at the case of Crimea in a previous episode and the impact of Russia's invasion on Ukraine's irrigation and farming. Today we take you further east to the Helmand River and the once lush Hamun wetlands on the Afghanistan-Iran border.
You would see miles and miles of ashen wastelands and a once kind of immense and vital wetlands turned into effectively dust bowls. And the same seasonal winds are now carrying much more really toxic, carcinogenic dust.
Upon arrival in the area, you're struck with most is the extraordinary hospitality of the locals. The best treat that these people would offer you is bottled water, not for themselves, because that's the best treat that they can offer you.
In this episode of the Global Jigsaw, we look at the turbulent geopolitics behind the water dispute between Afghanistan and Iran and its consequences for communities near the shared border. I'm Krassi Twigg, and this is the Global Jigsaw, an original podcast from BBC Monitoring, zooming in on political, security and social shifts around the world through the lens of its media. Our team listens to, watches and analyzes media narratives in 100 languages.
Radio Tehran. Мы не вторгались на территорию Украины.
Western countries are not the international community. That era has finished.
조중 두당 두 나라 최고 영도자 동지들께서는
It's a legendary river with two names, Helmand to Afghans, Helmand to Iranians. It emerges from the Hindu Kush mountains, runs through the central highlands to reach the western Afghan deserts in Helmand and Nimruz. It meets the Iranian border at the Hamun wetlands before flowing on to Iran's parched southeastern province of Sistan-Baluchestan. Our guide to this terrain is Barry Sadid from our Iran team.
The Hamun Oasis, or the Hamun wetlands, was once a vast expanse of interconnected bodies of fresh water. So we're talking a mixture of lakes, oases, marshes, in the midst of more arid hinterland in both the border regions of southwestern Afghanistan, southeastern Iran. But this borderlands would also provide the basis for agriculture, farming, fishing, and a really healthy variety of human activity. But this is what we're talking about in, say, the 50s and 60s.
And if you stand on the banks of the Hamun Lake now, what would you see?
You would see a really vastly diminished wetlands, the intensification of those sandstorms and dust storms to the detriment of the local border populations in both Iran and Afghanistan.
This transformation of what was once an oasis went as far as the eye can see, and it's not all because of the changing climate.
The fate of the Hamun wetlands is really tied to three things. The first and the most obvious is climate change, decrease in level of rainfall, the increase in periodic droughts, diminishing the surface water, and the river supply that feeds the wetlands from the Helmand River with its source in Afghanistan. But then we have more interesting human factors that people might not expect. On the Iranian side, what we have is actually what has diminished this really rich ecosystem has really been the encouragement of local agriculture, the building up of a similar kind of water infrastructure to feed the agriculture. We're talking irrigation, artificial lakes and so on, but really extracting more water and increasing the water stress on the Helmand wetlands in the first place.
Another colleague from our Iran team travelled to the region a few years ago. Sarbas Nazari met farmers on small patches of irrigated land on his journeys through Sistan-Baluchestan.
During my visit, I saw several gardens like farms for bananas, as well as lemons, but they're quite rare. You need a lot of investment to provide the water for them. I talked to one of the farmers who was telling me that his farm used to be much bigger, like 10 times than this, but it has evaporated over time due to lack of water, and it's no longer economically viable for him to continue farming.
Sarbas didn't expect to see bananas and lemons there, and his trip served up more surprises.
I traveled from Chabahar to Sarbas, and actually I visited nearly a dozen villages. In none of these villages there was any piped clean water for people. That means most of these people have to resort to ponds. And these ponds do not hold any clean or safe water. And in most of these ponds, there's this endangered species of crocodiles, which are known as gondos locally, and they're pretty dangerous. These locals try to fetch water, and some of them get bitten by the gondos, by the crocodiles. There have been so many children who have lost their limbs. And this shows the depth and the extent to which these people have to go to just gain access to some water which is not clean and safe.
A waterhole guarded by dangerous creatures. It sounds like the stuff of ancient legends. It's a humbling thought for those of us who take it for granted that bottled water is so precious here that's become part of Baluchi hospitality, offered as a special treat for guests.
When I was there, they would offer bottled water, and I would really feel embarrassed and ashamed that I have to drink that water that they reserve for the guests, not for themselves. It's a very rare commodity.
But what stands in the way of water reaching these lands? Let's find out from Barry.
Water infrastructure being built upstream in Afghanistan, which basically has increased the power of Afghans to restrict and control the water supply. And a pivotal moment for the Helmand wetlands in particular came in 1998.
1998 is a key moment in this story. Enter one of the main players, the Taliban. Their role shifting shape throughout this conflict. Stay with us, this will make sense later.
The first iteration of the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. The Taliban are conquering one Afghan province after another. They come to the northern city of Mazar-e-Sharif.
A military parade in Mazar-e-Sharif, eerily reminiscent of old Soviet-style parades, with tanks, Scud missiles, martial arts and marching bands. At that moment, the city was resisting, but a few months later, it fell to the Taliban.
Using the pretext of revenge, they basically carry out an ethnocide. They kill thousands of local Hazaras from the Hazara ethnic minority, who are also from Afghanistan's Shia minority, which is the majority sect in Iran. And the Taliban overrun the Iranian embassy, killing about a dozen Iranian diplomats.
International human rights groups managed to piece together what happened that August, based on witness and survivor testimonies, and called for action to prevent similar massacres by the Taliban. The Hazaras were the majority of victims, but the killing of Tehran's diplomats nearly caused an all-out war.
Tens of thousands of troops are lined up across the Iranian-Afghan border on either side between the Taliban and the government of the day in Iran. Hot war doesn't actually break out, but what we do see is the Taliban effectively using water as a weapon of war, cutting and diminishing the supply of the Helmand River into Iran by cutting off the sluices at the Kajaki Dam. And that from 1998 to 2001, in a period where there was already drought, really devastated the marshlands at the border.
If climate change and intensive agricultural policy on the Iranian side weren't enough to turn the Helmand wetlands into a desert, the use of water as a weapon of war by Afghanistan made things a lot worse.
It's important to remember the context in which the diminishing of the ecosystem and the economy is taking place. These are already relatively poor areas of both of these relatively poor countries.
Sarbas saw the harsh living conditions on the Iranian side when he visited Sistan-Baluchestan.
It's the worst affected area in a country which is already grappling with water shortages in general. We had that problem for decades, but Sistan and Baluchistan is probably the worst. Apart from that, we have the seasonal winds, which definitely disrupt livelihood. And during one of my visits there, I had to get stuck on the road for like 4 hours because there was no visibility at all due to one of these winds. And it was right in the middle of the summer. The sands and the winds that block your way create a lot of accidents. This is another geographical problem that people are facing.
You are listening to the Global Jigsaw from BBC Monitoring. It's not just the severe nature that makes life hard here. The local population faces institutionalized discrimination more acutely than people in other parts of Iran.
What makes the area different from other regions in the country is the fact that it is populated by an ethno-religious minority. Ethnically, they are Baluchis, and religiously, they are Sunni Muslims. And they're living in a country which is ruled by a Shia theocracy. The state discrimination and marginalization has been going on for decades when compared to other areas which are Shia majority. What also makes the area different is a wide range of problems that people are facing, from water shortages to unemployment to lack of education. The list is quite long.
When we're talking about this border province, we're talking about a region with a history of unrest. It has its own interconnected layers of grievance, and as part of that, we've seen protests, unrest, and militancy in this region, with protests more recently connected to the broader Mahsa Amini protest in Iran.
Sistan-Baluchestan often features in world news because of the frequent rallies there. It played an active part in the Women, Life, Freedom protest movement that engulfed Iran over the death of Mahsa Amini, the young Kurdish woman who died in police custody in September 2022 after she was detained over a loose headscarf.
The protests have always been there, but most strikingly, they were massive during the unrest that rocked Iran. The provincial capital, Zahedan, was perhaps the biggest flashpoint of all the unrest that hit the country.
The authorities responded with a brutal crackdown in September 2022. That day became known as Bloody Friday.
On one single day, on a Friday, at least 100 people got killed by the security forces. There were Friday prayer worshippers who came out peacefully chanting slogans against the government, but they were fired upon. And among those 100 people, there have been many children and even the disabled who were simply bystanders to the protest, but they got killed. And justice remains unserved for these people. So I would say these pent-up grievances, which have accumulated over decades, is the best explanation for dissidents in the area.
The Baluchi people seem to have paid a heavier price than the rest of the country for their defiance.
In 2022, 174 people were executed in the province for a variety of charges, mostly narcotics, and the proceedings, of course, have been questioned by rights organizations. But the horrible side to that is that 174 people is 1/3 of the total number of executions of 31 provinces altogether. And that's according to figures by Iran Human Rights, which is an Oslo-based advocacy group documenting the records of human rights in the country.
Poverty, discrimination, lack of employment opportunities, lack of water. There's no shortage of reasons for local people to want to leave. Barry has looked into the migration patterns.
We've seen climate migration. In Iran specifically, it's been westwards and northwards. So young people in search of work from the Sistan-Baluchestan province will head to other regions of Iran or beyond in search of work available, especially on arable land. And in Afghanistan, you'd see migration actually westwards. And this is all taking place against the backdrop of broader poverty, broader unrest. You have this lucrative borderlands at the same time that people are drawn to increasingly because of the diminishing of the legal economy. We're talking whether it's the trafficking of drugs, people, hard currency, fuel, and so on.
When you arrive in the area, you are facing a very harsh geographical environment. I mean, if you will, the wrath of nature has combined with this discrimination against the people and has made life pretty miserable for the locals there. This unfavorable geographical properties have led to lack of jobs. Most of these youngsters are tending to this profession, which is called suhtbari, which is the porting fuel and smuggling fuel into neighboring Pakistan, which is an absolutely perilous journey, I would say, because most of these people get killed on the way either by accidents or fires, or they get shot by security guards, border guards, or the IRGC.
The lack of water has no doubt had a profound effect on Baluchi life. The historic water dispute between Iran and Afghanistan is, as Barry was explaining, a major factor. Let's take a look at the actual dispute. What is it about?
So really, it's essentially about the Helmand River and who controls that river and what share of that river's water supply goes to which country. And this is a dispute that doesn't just go back decades, but goes back at least 150 years, right when the original Iran-Afghanistan border was drawn, of course, with the supervision of the superpower of the day, the British Empire. And the first real comprehensive legal framework for that treaty, which is still adhered to, at least rhetorically, by both sides, is the 1973 Helmand River Treaty, which delineates Iran's right for water supply, the observation of river water levels in Afghanistan, and what Afghanistan can and can't use from the river water supply.
So there's a treaty and both sides adhere to it. That should be the end of it, right? But this seems to have become a case of history running its course. Momentous events on both sides of the border muddled the original plans and opened new vistas of interpretation.
In Iran, you had the revolution in 1979 and the Islamic Republic shortly afterwards. And in Afghanistan, you've had a much more severe series of decades of regime change, war, civil war, foreign invasion and occupation, which has been really debilitating for its own ability to construct water infrastructure, let alone observe a treaty. But this status quo has actually strangely benefited Iran. And tensions were built up, especially during the most recent Republican era in Afghanistan, from 2001 to 2021. Afghanistan, while racked by civil war, was still empowered by foreign funding to build up a certain level of water infrastructure that could control, in theory, the supply of water flowing downstream into Iran and hold more in reserve to irrigate Afghan land. Most famously, we saw the construction of the Camel Khan Dam, which was inaugurated in 2021.
آبهای خروشان دریای هلمند در سرزمین سیستان دوباره به این مرز و بوم حیات بخشیده است.
The opening of the Kamal Khan Dam, which had been in construction for many decades, reignited the old dispute. Iran saw it as a denial of its rightful access to the waters of the Helmand River. The Afghans took to the letter of the treaty, which gave them the right to sell water above the volume reserved for Iran.
Then President Ashraf Ghani famously swore to make Iranians pay for water from Afghanistan with their oil.
A few months after the opening of the dam, the Taliban took back the whole country, including the water infrastructure management. That was in August 2021. The Taliban and Iran have had a complicated relationship, cooperative at times, hostile at others. They are what you might call frenemies. Let's take this example from 20 years ago.
Iran, and the IRGC in particular, actually helped the Americans. They had an actively cooperative relationship when it came to the US invasion of Afghanistan. It was actually the Quds Force commander, Qasem Soleimani, who literally provided, according to reports, a map of Taliban bases and military locations to the Americans. But this relationship obviously quickly soured, especially when Iran was listed as one of the so-called axis of evil.
But then the Taliban were useful to Iran while they were an insurgent group. They would attack Afghan water infrastructure in exchange for support from Iran. Fast forward to today, and the dynamics have changed again. Facing a victorious Taliban, the Americans withdrew from Afghanistan in September 2021, leaving the group in charge of the country.
The Taliban have gone from being a kind of a state to, again, a loose network of insurgents to now being a state again. When they're a loose network of insurgents, they needed money from whoever, and they had factions that were more pliable to Iranian interests. But now they're back, and they're not that loose network anymore, but rather a putative government who have defined responsibilities to their own population and a vested interest in actually protecting and boosting their infrastructure.
Iran's grievance is that Afghanistan is holding water back, to which Iran thinks it's entitled to under the 1973 treaty. Kabul's argument is that there's simply not enough water to share with the neighbors.
Iran claims that there is enough water. It's being held back by the Afghan water infrastructure that exists, and Afghanistan effectively just need to release more of it. But on the Afghan side, the narrative that we've had in previous Afghan governments and now the Taliban is that because of climate change, because of regional water stresses, that's impacted not just the Helmand River, but the water supply in Afghanistan more broadly and in the region. There just simply isn't enough water to supply Iran what it wants according to its interpretation of the 1973 Helmand Treaty.
And how much of a challenge is this for Iran?
Iran has a lot of leverage, but this also speaks to the limits of the putative legal framework for the water dispute and how actually it has to be resolved by extra treaty means to Iran.
For Kabul, rattling Tehran over the water issue could have knock-on effects in other areas.
The water issue is a live wire, but that's also connected to the issue of migration, border security, and most importantly for the Taliban, recognition of the Taliban government. And in Iran's view, another lever that the Iranians have is the 3 million Afghan refugees currently living in Iran, many of whom work, many of whom send remittances back home, many of whom wouldn't be able to find work in Afghanistan because of the economy under sanctions. And Iran have already intensified deportations of Afghans from Iran.
What's in Tehran's power that would appeal to the Taliban?
The one major thing that would appeal to the Taliban, that the Taliban have been searching for all across the world, has been recognition. Now, Iran and Taliban already have a pragmatic relationship. They already have a history of cooperation, we can say, during the Republican era and the American invasion. And the one thing that could appeal to the Taliban is a real commitment from the Iranian side for economic cooperation that could include as well Iranian expertise on water infrastructure being brought to Afghanistan, as well as increased Afghan access to ports in Iran, because famously Afghanistan is, of course, a landlocked country.
The idea of a pragmatic cooperation should be workable, especially when there are levers to be pulled. Access to ports would be a big deal for Afghanistan, but the reality is different, and the relationship hit a new low recently. Just a few months ago, there were skirmishes along the border between Nimruz and Sistan-Baluchestan provinces over water. Both countries are highly vulnerable to climate change. So what's the future looking like?
One thing we know for sure is that the climate crisis is only going to get worse. Water stress is going to increase, population is going to increase. There are going to be more demands for water on either side, and this encourages the kind of grandstanding rhetoric. We've also seen that the legal framework isn't strictly a legal framework. In practice, that's the issue of economic integration between the two countries, or migration, or border security. We can't predict whether relations will get worse or get better, but what we can say is that the water issue is really intimately tied to all of these other issues, and if relations worsen, it won't just be in a strictly legal sense, but we'll pull in all of these other factors at the same time.
Thanks to our contributors Barry Sadid and Sarbas Nazari, and thank you for listening. The researcher was Victoria Onikienko, our sound engineer is Nigel Dix, and the editor is Judy King. This episode was produced by the Global Jigsaw team, Kriszta and me, Krassi Twigg.